So on to my second video. Yesterday I'd mentioned that I had at least 3 videos to do, one yesterday, one today, one tomorrow. I may have a fourth. And certainly having the time to reflect on and prepare for this particular video has given me pause on some of the things I said yesterday. First and foremost, let me do a recap on what I would call an optimistic timeline as far as the virus is concerned, although today's video is really meant to be looked at on a much more personal level by all of us. As I said yesterday, it's today's and tomorrow's video that I'm most excited as an astrologer to share with you with regard to things to look out for. But as a recap, we talked about the fact yesterday that the transits that are currently being held are thought of as being responsible from a Western astrology perspective as far as the coronavirus is concerned. Number one, the bad news, or the expansion of the malady, let me call it that. The expansion of the malady continues till April the 4th at least. This conjunction occurs twice more, once on June 29th, once around November the 12th. So it's with us for a while, but the impact, the kind of pow nature of it, the expansion continues till April the 4th at least, so for the rest of this week. Am I really, I'm going to wait to see whether I think that whatever we need to know in terms of the expansion is going to be made available to us. Does it mean that the numbers slow down? We'll wait and see. I think right now the projection is that the numbers are going to increase, but it's more in terms of what is made available for us to process now. I said I had 3 videos to do, but I'm going to do a fourth that takes on a different timeline. But first I'm going to get down with today's, and tomorrow's the second and the third videos. And by all means, after this video, I'll place a link to the video I did yesterday at the end of this video, so you have that for context as well. Yesterday, when I talked about the fact that I was talking to different people, different clients, and they fell into 4 different categories, when I was preparing for this video, I realized that in a certain sense how cold and heartless it almost seemed, that there was a whole segment of the population that was not acknowledged. The people I am talking to are people for whom this particular pandemic has not impacted personally in terms of illness. They are not on the front lines healing people, necessarily, no, healing people, and they're not afflicted by the infection. That's not who I'm talking to. And when I talked about 4 or 5 categories of people yesterday, and I was preparing for this one, and it'll become apparent why, I realized that it's important to note that you can divide the world right now into 2 groups of people as you're asked to give people advice. One, people who are directly impacted by the affliction, either as frontline workers who are trying to aid people and help people, and of course the people who are actually infected. And the other group of us who are sheltering in place or locked down and therefore have 4 or 5 different responses to it. Frustration that things that were gathering momentum and were exciting have all of a sudden been put to a halt. Frustration that we feel like we should be productive in some ways, but are actually feeling like we want to rest and can only handle so much. Sorry about the beeping. I'll take it as confirmation for what I have to say, or something like that. I don't know. Does everything have to be mystical? It does kind of for me, but I'll let you figure that out for yourself. The people who, as I said, people who are frustrated, people who are resting, people who are busier because either they have to take pay cuts and continue to be at work, but are being asked to stay at work, but in an impacted way, so that there are fewer people to do work. They are bearing the responsibility, whether they're working from home or wherever they are, of taking on more work than normal, some for less pay. And the 4th group of people who are actually impacted financially in an immediate sense and are feeling that stress and pressure. I addressed my responses to those groups of people yesterday. I gave an optimistic timeline. I've shared one aspect of that timeline in my recap already, and I'll say one more thing about that. Remember, as I said, that this new moon that we had a few days ago on the 23rd of March was conjunct Chiron, and while I expect the bad news, so to speak, or the news about the affliction to escalate till at least April 4th, if not April 8th, the full moon, or April 10th, a couple days after the full moon, I also expect and hope and pray to see glimmers of healing information. And I'm not If I look at the headlines of the past 2 or 3 days or 4 days, I can see some of that in the works for myself, whether it is rapid testing or whether it is things mobilizing so that relief can be put into the system, how long it actually takes for something to come in. To some extent, I'm not referencing this press conference that was going on just as I was getting ready to do the video. And those of you who watch the US president's updates will know what I'm talking about. What I'm saying has less to do with who actually ends up taking credit for this, whether you are impressed by it or nauseated by it, or the question that is in my mind by the end of April is whether things start to become apparent and clear to us as healing the situation, whether it is by testing, whether it is by introducing things that can make people feel better or ultimately get better. This is not a promise to say that within 3 weeks during this lunar cycle things will be flooded into the system. I hope they somehow miraculously are, but we'll wait and see what that is. The question is the introduction of healing, the ray of light, the ray of spring. The other thing I mentioned was that the next new moon at the end of April introduces some sort of epiphany, liberation, some sort of lightning strike in that lunation that I'm also interested in observing. Does this mean that by May or June things start to lift? If not sooner, at least if we're able to tell who is infected and who is not, then there's a greater sense of who needs to be quarantined and who can enter the workforce and be around each other, as risky as that might be. I remain cautious, and if someone were to say, Avi, what do you, I favor the lockdown at this point in time until things are clearer, but astrologically, I'm continuing to look out for and can see where the new moon conjunct Chiron is starting to make its presence felt. We are not out of the expansion of the malady though. Okay, all of this is said and behind us. Why am I doing this video? Eclipses change signs every year and a half. And 2020 is a very powerful year in terms of transitions. We have the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, we had Saturn-Pluto in January, and we have eclipses changing signs. Eclipses changing signs from Capricorn, Cancer to Sagittarius, Gemini. Okay? When eclipses change signs, it's like a relay race to some extent. It's not an abrupt change. We see one set of eclipses trailing off, and I've talked about the Capricorn Cancer eclipses with my clients trailing off by September, maybe the end of the year, and we see the other set of eclipses starting up. The first of the new set of eclipses is a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius on June the 4th. Okay, we have a lunar eclipse on June the 4th, we have a solar eclipse on June the 20th, then we have a lunar eclipse on July the 4th. June the 4th, lunar eclipse Sagittarius, June the 20th, solar eclipse in Cancer, July the 4th, lunar eclipse in Capricorn, and the next new moon, interestingly, is also in Cancer, even though it's not an eclipse. So we have this handoff. As I've talked to you about lunar eclipses, 2 months before the lunar eclipse, April the 4th, the week before and week after, are important dates to start to make note of what is coming up. So the primary purpose of this video, 8 minutes into it, is to pay attention. I'll tell you in a second why I did the whole recap from yesterday, is to ask you to pay attention to what comes up this week and next week as a sign of what it is that these eclipses would be bringing. This eclipse, I've talked about the fact that eclipses happen in pairs. There are solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. Now, over the summer, we have 2 lunar eclipses and 1 solar eclipse. The solar and lunar eclipse on June 20th and July the 4th are the current, aka old eclipses, and the June 4th lunar eclipse is a new eclipse. They're eclipses of leaning into and they're eclipses of release. And this eclipse starts with an eclipse of release. You may have signs this week and next week with regard to what it is that needs to be released. And if you know your chart, it would be where the sign of Sagittarius sits in your chart. Okay, so if you know your chart and you know what house Sagittarius occupies, take a look at that and start to get a sense of what it is that you might be being asked to release. You're going to be asked to lean into where the sign of Gemini is in your chart and release where the sign of Sagittarius is in your chart. And if you don't know where Sagittarius is, just pay attention to what comes up this week and next week, things that are notable, things that give you a sense, again, of what it is that you may need to release. The eclipses of release and leaning into work side, together. So I'm going to talk about both releasing and leaning into. The idea of releasing is very similar to how we're feeling right now with regard to the virus, for the most part, if you belong to the group of people who are not directly afflicted by the pandemic in terms of illness, healing it, or fighting it. And that is when you have to release something, when the South Node is involved. South Node eclipses typically involve things that we are strong in and so proficient in that they give us a sense of comfort and indeed a sense of identity. But they are in our past. They are in our past. If I could just keep telling people that it is in your past, it might get through, because there's such a resistance to releasing what needs to be released because we are so comfortable holding on to it. The boat is trying to move towards the eclipses of leaning into, and the eclipses of release are happening. The universe, a spirit, a God knows that there's something here that is outworn its purpose, that is like a ripe flower or fruit that is starting to rot, but because we have such a comfort in it, we keep holding on to it. It's a little bit like when I talk to people about the fact that this is still a time of forward movement, or momentum, and I might get from certain corners a resistance. What do you mean it's forward movement? Everything is stopped. I wanted this, I wanted that, this was happening. What is going on? This is forward movement. From the end of March to the beginning of May, a lot of us look at forward movement as something that is really desired, but remember, as human beings, inertia is very easy for us. We are on an escalator, it is going somewhere, and we don't know where it is going, and it is scary. What is the reality going to be once things start to get back to normal? What is normal going to look like? When is normal going to show up? How long are we going to be dealing with the economic impact of this shutdown and whatever it is that we have been going through? This is forward movement, because choices will need to be made as a result of this very eclipsy set of heavy transit set of energies. And we don't know where this is taking us, but this is forward movement. And the pace is startling, actually, and quite rapid. April will be a month of forward movement, whether you relate to it that way or not. And we are going to be behaving in eclipsy ways. The resistance we feel to letting go of what was prior to the lockdown, some of us do, is very similar to the resistance we feel to releasing what needs to be released when eclipses of release occur. That's why I'm making a comparison or an analogy so you can relate to that feeling of things were going, things were happening, I was so excited this was going to happen, I was going to do this, I was going to do that, this, and bam, it's like, no, we find ourselves in a situation that is surprising and that seems paralyzed, but in fact is an acceleration. We may not really enjoy the acceleration because we don't know where it is going and what things will look like and how it will impact us, but it is an acceleration. As I said to you yesterday, my concern is that as things get back to normal and everyone is ready to move and accelerate, that is when we'll all need to take a step back. With Venus going retrograde in May and June, and then Mercury going retrograde in July, that is when we're going to have to take a step back and adjust to everything that has happened. Remember, astrologically, I've always said there's pockets of forward movement that are relatively brief, and then planets go retrograde, so we can, as people, deal with this acceleration with regard to what we need in order to process where we are at now and what needs to change. So, eclipses of release on a new axis make their presence felt. The first of these in the sign of Sagittarius on June the 4th. This means the week before and week after April the 4th present important initial cues. The curtains are opening on these new set of eclipses, and we may get some clues. Eclipses hit different people in different ways. And some people feel the eclipsiness very powerfully now. Some people will feel it later. We'll have plenty of windows in which the eclipses can be felt. We have an eclipse now. We're going to have 2 eclipses at the end of the year, and then certainly next year's eclipses are very much going to be on this axis. So why did I give you the summary and really talk about so much of what I talked about right now? Because the other thing that I want to tell you, and typically I don't have to tell you this with such a sense of seriousness and even sadness, is that eclipses are times when people transition, when people pass on, or news of passing on, or People and situations are eclipsed from our lives. And so yesterday when I was thinking about this particular video is when I realized that my video yesterday was really so selective in terms of the audience that I was talking to, because I was talking to people who I think may have the time to look at these videos, as opposed to a segment of population that is simply not separated from us because it is dealing with the direct impact of being afflicted by this pandemic, either as healers or as people who are suffering from it. So in this moment when we are frustrated, if you're feeling like you don't want to be productive and you want to relax, by all means, relax. And if you're lucky enough to be someone who can enjoy this pace and find time to reflect about what has been happening and what it affords you and what can be done and taken care of and where you can go. And frankly, if you don't want to reflect and you just want to relax. The funny thing is when I do this to myself or when I talk to my clients to do this, the moment you give yourself permission to relax and you take half a day off or day off, you spring out of whatever you're relaxing on and start to take action. And sometimes it's just that inner saboteur that's like, oh, you know, I should go take care of this and I should make hay while the sun is shining because this astrologer on YouTube has been telling me to do so, and there's other people are making me feel guilty that I'm not learning German or French. Don't do it if you don't feel like it. Take a break, take a breather if you have that good fortune available to you, if you're not feeling frantic. And you might find that as a result of that, the moment you take a break, the inner saboteur comes up again. It's just like, oh, now I want to write a book or record my album. Give yourself permission to do whatever it is that this is affording to. And for some people, this shutdown is affecting different people in different ways, and some people in very grave ways. I'm pausing about the use of the word grave, but it is the discussion of the eclipse that made me think about people and situations being eclipsed from our lives. So pay attention to what is being eclipsed or what is coming up as needing to be eclipsed. What signs are coming up for the next chapter of important changes and transitions. It will occur this week and next week. For some people, it will be a clue. It will be a gentle clue. For people who follow astrology, they might be able to pull everything together much more. But it's the first of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 odd eclipses that we're going to be contending with. And it sets us up for 2021 and the second half of this year. A month from now, May the 4th, the week before, week after, we're going to be dealing with the next eclipse. Then June the 4th, the eclipse will happen. June 20th, another eclipse will happen. May the 4th, July the 4th, another eclipse will happen. At the end of July will be another new moon. And then in August, we're going to have the 2-month, 2020 is one hell of a year. It's certainly shaping up that way. It's a year of transition and it's a year of change. So by all means, pay attention to this week. Figure out where you sit with regard to how you're being afflicted by things or not afflicted by them or enjoying the pace or not. And figure out there's a reason to some extent for some people. When I talk to my clients, for some people, this time is affording some people, it's giving people a little bit more breathing room. Not for everybody, not for people who are running around trying to heal people, not for people who are running around trying to generate some income, not for that segment of the population. But for some people, it may be giving time to reflect. It may be giving time so that things that were in the offing, even if they were exciting, were coming up a little too fast. So see if you can start to develop your own relationship with this. Understand that April is a time of forward movement. Understand that we're coming into a summer of eclipses and retrogrades, and think forward and prepare accordingly. I've shared a relatively optimistic timeline yesterday and then a relatively optimistic timeline today in terms of when it is that I expect to see some news or rays of healing enter our consciousness. But in 2 days' time, I'll give another timeline that may be a little bit more serious, and we'll see how we feel about that. But remember, ultimately, if you need to relax. If you're making hay while the sun is shining, feel free to do that. Do whatever it is that you need to do. Go ahead, no worries. Even the doggy agrees with me. And just remember that when you think it's going to be time for forward movement and everything is going to be lifting, is actually when in some ways we may be dealing with a certain amount of constriction and reevaluation. Because everything that has been put on hold, we're going to need to digest what that means for everybody, socially, economically especially. It's the economic part of it that I want to give you a heads up about. That actually leads us to a very good place to stop before tomorrow's video, which is going to pick up right here actually. Okay, if you found this video, yesterday's video, useful, feel free to share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified whenever I do new videos. Remember, we're heading towards a full moon, and you may not believe it, but again, a certain amount of pace is I'm doing videos every day, for the next 2 or 3 days. So pace activity may increase for certain people as we head towards April the 8th. My contact information is in the subject line below, so if you're interested in finding out about rates for readings, you can email me there, or if you want me to make an easy-to-read version of your chart, I can do that for you. You'll need to know your birth time for that, and until tomorrow, over and out. Thank you.